Hi, I'm Eric, and welcome to this week's video lesson. Today we're going to study about protecting ourselves from floods. This topic is based on Unit 7.6 in your book. That's page 102 and 103. But first, here's a situation. My house sits beside a river. But there's been a lot of heavy rain lately, so the river level is rising. And now it has risen over the banks and there is a flood. A deeper flood and an even deeper flood. So I want you to think, what can we do to protect my house from floods? What ideas do you have? Well, perhaps I could build some kind of wall to keep the floodwater away from my house. Maybe I could build up the sides of the river to keep the water in. Here, I've dug the river channel deeper so it can hold more water. Here's before, here's after. Another idea is to raise my house so that the floodwater won't reach it. Or maybe a combination of all of these things. But when we're considering flood defenses, we have to think about the cost. How expensive is it? The difficulty. The effectiveness. Will it work well? And also the impact on the environment. So our goals today are to know the different ways of reducing the risk of flooding. So how can we prevent the floods from happening? Also know the different ways of protecting ourselves when floods do occur. To understand and to be able to explain how each method of flood defense works. And to understand the advantages and disadvantages of each method. So let's begin. Protecting ourselves from floods. So how can we prevent floods? So when rivers flood, we help the victims with shelter and food, but that's a short-term solution. We also try to stop the floods from happening again. So here are 4 ideas for doing that. So number 1, control the water level. So we control how much water is in the river. One way of doing this is to build a dam on the river to trap water. This way, we can let the water out slowly. We can also build pumping stations. Then, when the water level rises, we pump water out of the river and into storage basins, or even into an empty field. So that's controlling the water level. Number 2, build flood defenses. So we could build up the river banks to make embankments to keep the water in. So an embankment is a raised riverbank so that if the water level rises, it won't flow over the side. The river can hold more. Second idea is to build flood barriers around built-up areas to keep water out. These could be concrete walls or metal barriers or even plastic barriers we can put up and take down. So here's an example of flood barriers. Third way is to make the river channel bigger. So you could dredge material from the river bed and banks so that the channel will hold more water. So dredge means to dig material from the bed of the river or the banks of the river. So now the river can hold more water and it won't overflow. Number 4, improve street drainage. So we have to make sure that street drains can cope with the heavy rainfall. We also need to make sure they're cleaned often to remove any blockages. but there's a blocked street drain, so that won't be very effective. So we have to make sure we keep them clean. Now here's a diagram showing how stormwater runoff, that's the surface runoff in the streets, how that reaches the river. So when the water goes down the street drain, it's taken in a storm sewer to the river. Now, if this reaches the river very quickly, or a lot of water reaches the river quickly, the water can overflow. But if the water from them could be drained into soil instead, then the river wouldn't rise so fast. And number 5, control land use around the river. Now this won't prevent flooding, but it means the flood will not be a problem for us. So the first idea we have here is to stop people building on the floodplain. So this is about planning how we use the land. So land near the river in the flood zone, this could be used for certain things like sports grounds or parks. That won't be too badly affected if it floods. So here's a diagram that shows some planning ideas. So the more important buildings, such as hospitals, are built further from the river on higher land. And as we get closer to the river, we use it for things like agriculture and recreation. Another idea is to plant more trees in the drainage basin. If we plant more trees, they can absorb more water, so less water goes into the river, and the river is less likely to overflow. Also, pay farmers to allow fields along the river to get flooded. So there'll be less flooding elsewhere, where it will do more damage. So on the next page, we have a photo of another kind of flood barrier, and we can see it looks quite effective. And here we have an embankment along the river. So they are ways to prevent flooding from happening. But if our house is at risk of flooding, we have to think of some ideas to protect it or to lessen the damage if a flood happens. Now let's look at protecting our homes. Lots of our homes are already in areas that are at risk of flooding. So we have to think of ideas to protect them if a flood does happen. So what can we do to homes to protect them? This drawing gives us some ideas. So let's start in the kitchen. So in this home, the kitchen units are made of stainless steel. A kitchen that's made of wood would be really damaged by a flood, but stainless steel won't be damaged by the water. Also, all the electrical sockets are above the level of the floodwater. Water and electricity are not a good combination, so we have to make sure that they won't be at risk of causing an electrical shock if there is a flood. In addition, all the floors and the skirting boards are tiled. In the UK, most floors are made of wood and they may have carpet on them, and this would really get damaged during a flood. So having a tiled floor and tiled skirting board will help protect it from flood water. Also, the house could be built on raised foundations. So here's an example of raised foundation. So this will keep the house out of the flood level. The windows and the outer doors could have metal flood barriers. We put them in place when there's a flood warning. And the front drive or the driveway is made of gravel to let rain drain away. So the driveway is where we can park our car in front of the house. If we use gravel or small stones, it will let the water drain into the soil, so there's less surface runoff and less risk of flooding. Another idea is having no carpet on the lower steps of the stairs. These are also made of concrete. And storage in the garage could be on raised shelves, so we keep our possessions out of the risk of floodwater. Okay, now let's look at your turn. Question 1. Look at the drawing on page 102. Name the features at A, B, C, and D, and say what job each one does. Then, what's going on at E, and how can this prevent floods? So pause the video now and write your answers in your notebook, and then we'll check. Okay, if you're finished, we'll check your answers. So let's look at A. So A is a dam. It controls the water level by trapping water and letting it out slowly. B. B is a pumping station. It also controls the water level, but this time by pumping water out of the river and into a storage basin or empty field. C. C are embankments. These are raised riverbanks that keep water in the river channel and stop it overflowing. D. D is a flood barrier. It stops water reaching built-up areas. So this doesn't prevent flooding, the flood has happened, but it keeps the flood water away from places we want to protect. Okay, in question B, what's going on at E? What is that boat doing? Well, at E, the riverbed is being dredged. This makes the river channel deeper so it can hold more water and the river won't overflow. Okay, let's look at question 2. Each blue panel on page 102 shows one approach to flood prevention. So we have controlling the water level, building flood defenses, making the river channel bigger, improving street drainage, and controlling land use around the river. So which one do you think A, costs most, B, is best for wildlife, C, costs least, D, makes the river look best, and E would look best if you were building a new town? And give reasons for your answer. So again, pause the video, and when you've finished, continue and we'll compare answers. Okay, let's check. So which one costs most? Well, controlling water level costs most. Dams and storage basins are very large, strong structures that are very expensive to build. So that's definitely the most expensive. Which one is best for wildlife? Well, controlling land use is best for wildlife. Leaving the land in a natural state with trees and plants lets wildlife live undisturbed. Which one costs the least? Well, again, controlling land use, this costs the least. So dams, embankments, and other expensive structures won't be needed if we stop building on the floodplain. Which one makes the river look best? Well, controlling land use keeps the river looking natural and beautiful. And finally, which would be best if you were building a new town? Well, in my opinion, controlling land use would definitely be best. By not building on the floodplain, the other defenses won't be needed. Land beside rivers could be used for parks and sports grounds instead of building. So, as we can see, there are many benefits to controlling land use. So let's review the main points from today. So first of all, methods to reduce the risk of flooding. Controlling water level. This can be done by building dams. Dams trap water and control the flow of water entering the river to prevent it overflowing. Another advantage of this is it can also be used to generate electricity. It creates a lake or reservoir which can be used as a storage of water also. However, they're very expensive and difficult to build. Also, a large area of land is flooded behind the dam. Another way of controlling water level is with a pumping station. So this pumps water out of the river and into storage basins or empty fields to reduce the water level of the river and prevent it overflowing. Another positive of this is the water in storage basins can be used as a supply of fresh water. However, storage basins, again, are very expensive to build and they require a lot of space. Or if we don't use a storage basin, we need to have some unproductive fields that we're willing to flood, which may not be available. Okay, another method to reduce the risk of flooding is building flood defenses. One of these is an embankment, so we can build up the banks of the river to prevent the river overflowing when the water level rises. So this keeps the water in the river. These are good because they can be built in places that need the most protection. However, again, they're quite expensive and difficult to build, and they may spoil the view of the river. Another flood defense is a flood barrier. These are usually temporary and portable structures put in place to prevent floodwater reaching certain areas. They're good because they're cheaper than the other types of defenses, and we can put them in place when we need them and put them away when we're not using them, when there's no flood. But they're not as strong or reliable as other types of defenses. They also don't prevent flooding. They just prevent the floodwater reaching some areas. So another method to reduce the risk of flooding is make the river channel bigger. So we do this by dredging, digging material from the riverbed to make it deeper and wider so the river can hold more water and it's less likely to overflow. This is cheaper than other types of defenses, and that dredged material can be used in construction. However, the sediment will be deposited in the river channel again in time, so the river will build up its bed again. Another method is to improve street drainage. So ensuring the street drains are sufficient and clear from blockages. So we need clear drains that can quickly remove urban runoff, and this will prevent localized flooding in urban areas. So most urban areas have adequate drains already, and maintenance is usually not too difficult. However, drains in low-lying areas may not be effective if they lead to a river that's already full. So this will cause the drains to back up and water will come back out onto the streets. Also, these drains often lead straight to the river, and this will cause the river level to rise very quickly and it may overflow. So controlling land use around rivers. So one thing we can do is stop building on floodplains. So land at risk of flooding should be left natural or zoned for non-essential use, such as parks or sports grounds that will not be greatly impacted by flooding. This is good for the environment as it eliminates the need for other flood defenses. However, land in floodplains is flat and it's suitable for building on. So many settlements are already built there, and we need more and more houses. So we need to find places to build our houses. So it's not always, there's not always land available outside of the floodplains. So that's the end of today's lesson. Thanks for your attention, and I hope to see you back at school very soon. Goodbye.